Hi, welcome to this webinar on how to improve your grammar and vocabulary for your IELTS writing. My name is Maria Treadaway from IELTS Writing Task2.net. Did you know that of the 2.75 million people that took IELTS last year, the average band score for writing was only 5.5? And yet, I bet that most of you on this webinar are aiming for 6.5, 7 or higher. And research also shows that there were two problems. The first was that people weren't using a wide enough range of vocabulary and they were making many mistakes with spelling and word form. And the second problem is grammatical range inaccuracy, meaning they weren't using a wide enough range of grammatical structures and they were making too many mistakes.
Does this sound familiar to you? Well, that's why during this webinar I promise to teach you the 10 most common grammatical mistakes in IELTS writing and how to fix them. I'll also show you how to make your writing sound fluent and accurate using collocations and academic vocabulary. And finally, I'll show you a tool that you can use to build your knowledge and accurate use of collocations. That's my promise to you during this webinar. Now, after the webinar, I will be making a special offer that will help you achieve the IELTS results you need. But regardless of whether you take me up on that offer or not, you will find tremendous value from this webinar. Plus, as a thank you for showing up and being committed to achieving your IELTS writing goals, I'm also going to give you a recording of this webinar and the completed notes to show my appreciation. So you don't have to worry about missing out on any of the important tips and strategies in this webinar. Now, as we go along, send in your comments, questions and suggestions. I'll cover those a bit later in a question and answer section after we've gone through the content and made sure that you've gotten everything you need. Okay, let's get started. We'll take a look at the most common mistakes and how to avoid them. We'll look at the use of articles, a, an and the. We'll look at subject-verb agreement, the pluralization of nouns, mistakes with common grammatical structures, mistakes by not using finite verbs, mistakes using because and because of, mistakes using the wrong word form or part of speech, the 11 most common spelling mistakes, and also common punctuation mistakes. But before we do that, let's just discuss some general tips that will help you. First of all, always leave time to check your writing. Sometimes the best way to do this is at the end of sentences and paragraphs. In other words, don't wait until you finish the whole essay. It's easier to check a sentence or a paragraph than an essay. And also, you may have run out of time by the time you finish your essay. Another thing is you're probably making these mistakes because you're writing too quickly, and you probably don't see these mistakes because you are reading too quickly. So here's a suggestion. Read with a pen in your hand as you check. And that way you really look at the words as you read them, and you're far more likely to see the mistakes. And then finally, make a checklist of your own mistakes. If there's a word you misspell, for example, write it down. Here's a suggestion for how you could record your errors. Get a notebook, divide it into 3 columns. On the left-hand column, you could record the error. In the middle column, you could record the correction. And then most importantly, or I think most importantly, on the right-hand column, you can record the type of error you made. So for example, if it was a grammar error, what was it? Was it a tense error? Was it an error with articles? Was it an error with not using finite verbs? If it was a spelling error, what was the word? Write it out correctly. If it was vocabulary, was it a wrong spelling? Was it the wrong word form? Or just the wrong word for that context? This way, every time you go to write another Task 2 IELTS essay, you can open up your notebook, have a quick look at the types of errors you're making, and it increases your awareness of these errors. And that's the first step towards actually making your writing more accurate. So try it out, see how it goes. So the first error by far is articles. Have a read of the two sentences on the left. Television and video games have become essential entertainment for many children. Some people believe we should return to traditional value system. Now you should know that you need an article, a, the, an, or perhaps zero article before a noun. If you look at the diagram on the right hand side, this is, I think, a really easy way of remembering or becoming more aware of when you can use articles. The first thing to decide is whether the noun you're looking at is countable or uncountable, singular or plural. So let's look at our first example. Now the problem noun here is entertainment. Now hopefully you know that this is actually countable, and in this case it's singular. There are many types of entertainment. Now the next step is to decide whether the noun is known to the reader or listener as well as to the writer or speaker, i.e. is the noun definite. If it is definite, we're going to use the, as the diagram suggests. But if it's not definite, in this case, we're going to use a or an. So, we have our noun, entertainment, we have our adjective here. So in terms of word order, we need to insert an article, an, before the adjective. Let's take a look at the one below. Some believe we should return to traditional value system. Now hopefully you can see there's a problem with this noun here, system. If we follow the diagram, this is a countable noun. In this case it's singular, and in this case it's one of many systems, which is what a and an mean. So here again we need to insert a. Now traditional and value are both modifying system, acting as adjectives, so we need to insert it before those adjectives. A traditional system. In general, when you use the, we're speaking about something definite that both the listener and the reader or writer know about. When we use a or an, we're speaking about one of many, or speaking generally. Those are the basic rules. Another very common mistake are mistakes with subject and verb agreement. Now, subject and verb is a clause, and it's the basic building block of any English sentence. Have a read of these three sentences. Number 1. Television and video games has become an essential entertainment for children. Number 2. The relationship among families have become strained due to ... Number 3. There have been a change in the composition of the family. So looking at sentence number 1, hopefully you can see that we actually have two things here, television and video games. So if I change those two things into a pronoun, I would use they. Can I say they has? No, I can't. I have to say they have become. And therefore my subject and my verb agree. Looking at the second sentence, let's identify the verb. Okay, have again, have become. Now this one looks as if the subject is families, and families have makes sense. However, if we look at this word here, among is a preposition, and anything that comes after a preposition is an object. It's never a subject. Therefore, the subject in this sentence is actually the relationship. And if we think about which pronoun would use with the relationship, it would be it. So it have, can we say that? No, we can't. We need to say it has, or the relationship has. And now that subject and that verb agree with each other. In sentence number 3, this is a bit trickier. So this is a very, very common construction, which we'll look at later. It looks as if there is the subject, but in actual fact this is what we call a dummy subject, and the real topic of this sentence is a change in the composition of the family. Now there's three parts to this sentence, and the thing that we're talking about is a change. The composition and the family are actually objects of these prepositions in and of. Now again, we've identified a change as the subject. If we think about changing that into a pronoun, it would be it. Can we say it have? Here's the verb here. No, we can't. We have to say it has. And now our subject and our verb agree with each other. There has been a change in the composition of the family. Another common mistake is the pluralization of nouns. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's read these two sentences. Number one, there are two main reasons causing alienation among family member. Number two, government and company could also increase work holiday. So in sentence number one, hopefully you can see that we've already counted two of these reasons. So we need to make sure that any nouns agree with the number that we have in front of them, in this case 2. There's another mistake in this sentence as well. Are we talking about just one family member? No, we're talking about family members in general. Therefore, we need to pluralize this noun by adding the S. So, when you are making general points, you must pluralize the noun. Let's apply that to number 2. Government and company. Okay, so we're talking generally, so let's pluralize these nouns. Governments and companies. Could also increase work holiday. Again, we're speaking generally, so we need to pluralize the noun. Now let's take a look at mistakes with very common grammatical structures. Number 1. There have much air pollution in China due to heavy industry. So the structure we're focusing on is this here. But the problem is it's used incorrectly. After there, when you're introducing some topic, we can never use there without some form of the be verb. In this case, again, we need to make our subject and our verb agree with each other. So, hopefully you can see that air pollution, in this case, is the topic we're talking about. If we go back to our articles rule, we have to decide, is it countable or uncountable? In this case, pollution is uncountable, and therefore we need a singular verb. So instead of there have, we need to write there is much air pollution. Now there's another small problem with this sentence as well. This word here, much. If we look at the grammar of this sentence, we can see that it's positive. However, we shouldn't use much in a positive sentence. We can only use it in negative sentences. For example, there isn't much air pollution. What we have to do is replace it with a lot of air pollution. So now the sentence should read, there is a lot of air pollution in China due to heavy industry. Remember, you must always use some form of the verb be with there. There is, there are, there have been, there were, there was. The second sentence has this very common construction here. Most of buildings are mainly built for functional reasons. Now, the problem is, when we're using most, if we use of with it, we need to have some kind of determiner. Most of the buildings are mainly built for functional reasons. Now, if we have some kind of determiner, in this case the, we are talking about a specific set of buildings. However, this looks like it's actually a sentence trying to describe a general point. Therefore, I need to take out both of these and just have most buildings are mainly built for functional reasons. So you have two options. You can either do most plus a plural noun, or you can have most plus of plus, a determiner. In this case, a determiner is usually the, or it could be my, plus noun. Those are the forms that go with most. Let's take a look at the last sentence and see how it's constructed. Okay, we have here air pollution. This is the subject. And hopefully you can see that this complement here completes that subject. So the main idea is air pollution is common in China. Now what we have in the middle of this clause is a relative clause. But what has happened is we have reduced the relative clause. However, we've done it incorrectly. And the problem is this verb. Now if I were to write out this whole relative clause, I would write out this, which is caused. Now hopefully you can see which is caused by heavy industry is passive. We're talking about air pollution. It doesn't cause itself, it's caused by heavy industry. Now if I want to reduce a relative clause, all I have to do in the case of a passive relative clause like this one is cross out the which, the relative pronoun, cross out the be verb, and I'm left with caused. So air pollution, caused by heavy industry, is common in China. Let's put those commas in. And this is a reduced relative clause. Another problem is with the use of finite verbs. Now a finite verb, we look down here, is one that is in either present simple or past simple form. And every sentence needs to have a finite verb in English. So let's look at these first two. Distance learning offering study opportunities, working overtime becoming very common in Asian countries. So number one, here's the subject, distance learning. Now we have a verb-like thing in the middle, but it's not in a present simple form or a past simple form, so we know it's incorrect. We have to change this into present simple or past simple. So we have to think about the meaning of our sentence. Here I'm trying to make a general point, and therefore I'm far more likely to use present simple. So to change offering into present simple, all I have to do is type offers. And remember, I need to make my verb agree with my subject. Here's the subject. If I were to change that into a pronoun, it would be it. So it offers study opportunities. Looking at number two, here is our subject, working overtime. If I were to change that into a pronoun, it would again be it. Now, I have two choices in terms of the finite verb I use and also the tense I use. If I look at the sentence, there's two main meanings. One could be I'm talking about a trend, in which case I would use the present continuous is becoming very common in Asian countries. Is my finite verb in this case. Or if I wanted to connect the recent past with now, I could actually choose to use present perfect simple. Has become very common. So it depends on your meaning as to which finite verb and which tense you use. But in both of these cases, is a finite verb and has is a finite verb. And so I'm using a finite verb in both of these sentences. Another common mistake is in the use of because and because of. Let's read these three sentences. Air pollution is increasing, full stop, because of there are many factories and cars. Now hopefully you can see or you know that of is a preposition, and what follows a preposition is a noun. However, here what follows is the subject and the verb. So we have to get rid of those because they are not a noun. Now it's correct because of many factories and cars. But there's another problem. Can you see that here I've interrupted my idea by putting a full stop in? So I have to get rid of that full stop and make this into a little b. And now the sentence is grammatically correct. And I'm using a preposition here and two nouns there, many factories and cars. Now let's have a look at the second sentence. Again, hopefully you should see that I've interrupted my idea with a full stop. First thing we need to do is get rid of that and change the punctuation. Okay, let's read it and see if it's okay. Air pollution is increasing because there are now far more factories and cars. So what we did effectively was change this because into a conjunction, joining the two clauses in our sentence. After because, we have our subject and our verb. So this is good. And here in the main clause, we have our subject and our verb phrase is increasing. Now, the last sentence is very similar to the second sentence, but here's another very common mistake. Instead of interrupting the flow, we are still slightly interrupting with a comma. But we don't need to use a comma in English. We just continue the idea. Now you may have seen sometimes, if we look into the middle sentence, you may have seen that we want to sometimes emphasize the subordinate clause first. In this case, we need to change the order because there are now far more factories and cars, but because we've started with the subordinate clause, now we must use a comma and of course make the a lowercase a. So you can start with the subordinate clause first, but if you do, then you must have a comma after that subordinate clause. So just to recap, the patterns are because of plus noun, because of is a preposition here, because plus subject and verb, and don't use a comma before because or a full stop for that matter as well. Other common mistakes involve using the wrong word form. Read number 1. For instance, life in the past was peace and harmony. Now hopefully you know that after a be verb you need to have an adjective form. Peace here though is a noun, so how do you change it into an adjective? By adding full. How do we change harmony into an adjective? With the suffix -ous. Number 2, the internet is a new education method. Now we have here a noun. What comes before a noun? An adjective. However, education here is a noun form. We need to change this noun form into an adjective. How do we do that? By adding al. And in the last example, students might feel a sense of isolated and loneliness. Okay, like we saw before, we know that of is a preposition, and we know that after prepositions we need to have a noun. We have a noun here, so that's okay, but you should realize that isolated is an adjective. How do you change isolated into a noun? By adding the shin ending, a sense of isolation and loneliness. It's very important that you know how our noun phrases are constructed, and you know how to change verbs into nouns, into adjectives, into adverbs. In this way you'll be able to use your new vocabulary much more flexibly and accurately. Spelling above band score 6 is still a problem for lots of people. Now, according to the Cambridge Learners Corpus, the 11 most common spelling mistakes at band score 6 and above are the words government with an N, environment with an N, there with an EI, different with an E, believe with an IE, percentage with an A, society with an IE, until, which with an H, nowadays with an A and an S, and finally definitely with an I. Test yourself. See if you can spell all of these words 100% correctly. If you can't, keep practicing. Finally, we have punctuation. Read this short passage. There are many people learning English overseas now. This is because speaking English can help secure a good job. However, it's also important to consider the cost of education. Studying abroad has its own advantages. So, hopefully you can see that here is a proper noun. So as soon as we use a proper noun, we need to use a capital letter. So that should be a capital. Another thing is, this is one complete idea here, but we've tried to join it with a comma. Well, we can't do that. We need to finish the idea with a full stop and then turn this into a capital letter. So full stop, capital letter. This is because speaking English, here again we have our proper noun that we need to capitalize, can help secure a good job. However, it's also important. We have two mistakes here. This kind of word is called a discourse marker. They're like signposts that tell our reader which direction we're going in. However, the grammar of discourse markers is very particular. I've tried to use it with a comma, but I can't. I have two choices. I can either finish that idea with a full stop and have a capital letter like that, or instead of a comma, I can use a semicolon. A semicolon is in effect a conjunction joining the clauses. I don't need a capital letter after a semicolon. I still need the comma after the however. Now you'll see it's also important. So this is a contraction of two words, it is. So I need to show that by adding an apostrophe. It's also important to consider the cost of education. This is good. I finished this idea with a full stop and started the new sentence with a capital letter. Studying abroad has its own advantages. Whereas here I forgot the apostrophe. In this case I don't need an apostrophe because this isn't a contraction of two words. It's actually the possessive adjective, its own advantages. So when you are thinking about punctuation, all proper nouns need a capital letter. Finish your ideas with a full stop and start the new sentence with a capital letter. Be careful when you're using discourse markers. Be careful when you are using contractions of words. And always proofread for punctuation and separate your ideas into paragraphs. So hopefully this has given you a few ideas of what to look for when you're editing your essay. The more that you practice, the better you will become. And I really recommend that you keep an error correction notebook and that you actually correct your writing as you write either the sentence or the paragraph. It's so much easier to correct a sentence or paragraph rather than a whole essay. And keep an eye out for these things that we've gone over because these are very common mistakes. I noticed there were a couple of questions while I was speaking. Thank you very much for those. I'll answer those questions a bit later, so please keep sending in your comments or your questions as we go through the content. But let's get back to addressing our second challenge. So now we know what to look for when we're checking our writing for grammatical, punctuation and spelling mistakes. The next problem is how to sound fluent and accurate in using the right word in the right form. And for that we need collocations. First of all, let's define collocation. Well, collocations are when words have a tendency to co-occur. In other words, they go together. So if I say fish, you're probably thinking chips. And if we take a look at these three examples, commit a crime, perform surgery, make a phone call, all of these patterns have verb plus noun, but there are other patterns that you can also have with collocations. I think one of the biggest challenges of learning a language is actually learning vocabulary, and it's something that you're going to have to do every single day. And one of the biggest challenges within learning vocabulary is developing your knowledge and use of collocations. But there really are massive benefits, and the first one is you're going to sound more fluent and natural in your speaking and in your writing. And in the process, your writing will become more accurate because you're using the words properly that co-occur together. And as a result, you'll score far more highly in the lexical resource criteria of the writing descriptors. So let's go over to that website I was mentioning before. So the web address is up here, flax.nzdl.org. If we scroll down here, on the right hand side, you'll see this phrase here, learning collocations. So this is where we want to go. So click into this and you'll come to this web page here. You'll see up here that there is a place that you can put in the word that you want to find a collocation for. So let's imagine that we are doing a causes and solution essay, and we have to describe the causes or the factors responsible for a problem. So let's have as our word factor. Now down here you can see Contemporary English Wikipedia, Academic English and Standard English. Now what these are corpuses. Now a corpus is really a collection of words and texts that can be accessed using software called a concordancer. So there are many online concordances that you can use to have a closer look at the patterns in different types of text. So for example, a corpus could be a corpus of texts from law, or it could be a corpus of texts from speeches, speaking. And each of these different types of written and spoken texts have their own patterns and their own high frequencies of words that they use. So going back to our site, we have a corpus, it's called the BNC, British National Corpus, and it's just standard English, it's spoken and written texts. And then if you wanted to have a more academic look at the patterns involved, you could look at the Academic English Corpus, or you could look at the corpus which is made up from Wikipedia. But let's have a look at the Academic English and see what patterns are there, and then actually compare the patterns with the British National Corpus, just the Standard English Corpus. So you just press go, and I'll just scroll up here. Now what we have, so we have factor, and on the left hand side we have the pattern, so we've got adjective plus factor, and then down here we've got noun plus factor. And then we've got factor plus preposition plus noun, and then factor of plus noun. And we can also use factor as a verb, so verb to plus factor, factor plus preposition plus noun. So there are all of these different patterns. Let's look at the first lot of patterns, adjective plus factor. Now these are the most common or most frequent collocations. So the first one is important factor. The number that you see here is actually the frequency. So there are 135 instances within the corpus or the body of texts that we selected. Now to see how they're used, all we have to do is click on important factor, and you can see all of the different types here of important factor. And I just always look at the most frequent examples. So important factor, there's 135 examples. That's a lot of examples. So let's click on those. And what comes up are the actual examples within the texts of when important factor comes up. Okay, so basically what this shows is how to use important factor in context. So you can kind of get a feel, the kind of context and how to use that collocation. Let's have a look at factor plus preposition plus noun. So we can see this phrase here, factor in the development, is the most frequent. There are 6 examples, 6 instances in this corpus. So let's click on that. Now already, just as a point, you can see that the preposition attached to factor is in. So that's another thing that you need to record in your vocabulary notebook, is the prepositions that are attached to words. So let's have a look. Diplomatic relations with the United States was a distinct factor in the development of the character of the Mexican Revolution. So this whole phrase, factor in the development of, you can just take that and use it in your own writing. So something is a factor in the development of something else. So let's go back up. We had selected the academic English corpus. Let's see if there's actually any difference in the way that academic English uses factor compared to standard English. So let's now select the standard English corpus and press go to see. Okay, so you can see immediately that very similar patterns are there, adjective plus factor, and you can see how common it is. Look at that, important factor. 378 instances in the standard English corpus, and here major factor, key factor, significant factor. So I think actually that this corpus, the standard English corpus, just here, is more useful for you, for your purposes, than the academic English corpus. You could perhaps use the academic English corpus when you're at university. Again, if we look down and we look at the factor plus preposition plus noun, again the most common collocation is factor in the development of. And if you look at all of this and just become aware of the kind of words that co-occur together, your writing's going to become far more fluent and far more natural sounding and far easier for your reader to actually read and understand if they're a native speaker. So that's all I want to say about collocations, and go out and check out what's on offer at flax.nzdl.org. So let's go over what you've learnt today. You've learnt the importance of checking your writing, and I've shown you what mistakes to look for in your writing and how to fix them. You've also learnt how to make your writing more fluent and accurate by using the correct word choices and the collocations. And I've given you a free website which you can use to build your collocation vocabulary. Now, let me get to all of your questions and check your answers. Please don't worry if I don't get through all of your questions, because I'm going to email you with the answers tomorrow when I send out the recording of this webinar. Okay, let's have a look at some of these questions. I was writing them down. Okay, I have a big problem with articles and the. How do I use them? Okay, so basically when we use the in English, it means something specific. You are speaking specifically. When you use you're either mentioning the thing you're talking about for the first time, so it's not specific. The second time you mention it, it will be the. And is more general than the. Now there are a whole lot of rules to do with and the, but the general versus specific is the most useful distinction. I'm not going to go into all of the rules because you can look them up on Google, and to be honest, if you're a language that doesn't have articles, you're probably always going to be making some mistakes with articles because they're very hard to master. I'm sorry to say that. Okay, we have a question about prepositions. So prepositions are words like in, of, at, on, so they're usually small words, and they come before nouns, and they preposition, so they position the noun in either space or time. Basically, whatever comes after a preposition can never be the subject. So it's never a subject. It's always going to be the object of that preposition. For example, if I say on the table, or the pen is on the table, table can never be a subject because it's always going to be the object of the preposition on. So hopefully that makes sense. We have a question here about finite verbs. So I mentioned finite verbs. So basically finite verbs are verbs that have a time sense. So that's going to be our present simple or our past simple verb forms. And just to remind you, finite verbs are important because you have to have a subject before a finite verb, or after a subject, I should say. After a subject, you must use a finite verb. So either a verb in present simple or a verb in past simple. So it has a time sense. Okay, we have a question about reduced relative clauses. Without actually typing things down, this is quite hard for me to do. So what I might do actually is a little video. I'll create a little video and upload it to YouTube, and in my email to you I'll send the link to you about reduced relative clauses. I think that's probably easier. Okay, here's a question about because and because of. How do we use them? So because is a conjunction, and a conjunction joins two clauses. Now remember, a clause, C-L-A-U-S-E, is a subject and a verb. Okay, so after we use because, the word because, as a conjunction, we are going to have a subject and a verb. However, the phrase because of ends with a preposition. So we're not going to have a clause, a subject and a verb, after because of, because it's essentially a prepositional phrase. So after because of, we must use a noun. Yeah? Actually, I'm just looking at all of these questions that we have. There's quite a few, and I'm just aware of the time. I might actually write down the questions and the answers for my email. I think that's going to be better with this because they're quite detailed and the explanations might get a little hard. So what I might do now, don't worry if I haven't answered your question. You just look out in your email and I will email the questions and the answers to you. Let's actually move on to my offer. So as I promised at the beginning of this webinar, I have a special offer for you. Now if you received all you need from this webinar, of course you are free to go, but for those that are interested in improving their IELTS writing really quickly, let me tell you what I have for you. Now obviously I know that you want IELTS success, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And maybe you want to get into university, or maybe you want to migrate, immigrate, or whatever your goals, I can help you achieve success. I also know how frustrating it can be for people to take the IELTS test time after time and get their writing results only to be completely disappointed by the result, but just not know actually how to improve it. Or maybe it's that you've never taken the IELTS exam before, but you want to estimate your score and accurately identify ways of improving your writing before wasting the time and money on booking an IELTS test when you're not ready. Whatever your reasons, you are in the right place. Now, my students consistently tell me that writing is their biggest challenge in IELTS. And for many of you, your IELTS band score is what is actually holding you back from achieving your dreams. And that's why I'm offering personalized writing feedback packages. So you can send in your IELTS writing for Task 1 and Task 2, and I and my team of markers will assess your writing and give you detailed feedback. But be warned, having corrected thousands of IELTS writing tasks, one thing is the same for everyone. They all say, I had no idea I was making all these mistakes. They can't believe they were making so many mistakes. Well, believe it. There's just no way you can accurately assess your own writing and pick up on all your mistakes. You can read the tips, you can follow the guidelines, you can do your best, but to make fast and reliable progress, you must have someone else to look through your work, point out mistakes, and make suggestions for improvement. I can help you understand what you've been doing wrong and what you need to change to get a higher score. And here's what will happen when you see your corrected work with our feedback and suggestions for improvement. You will understand how to structure your writing to create the best first impression. You'll be able to focus on fully answering the question instead of wasting your energy on including content that doesn't matter. Your preparation will become much easier because you'll have a specific list of areas to work on. This is because all the grammatical errors will be highlighted, fixed, and explained. This means you won't keep making the same grammar and vocabulary mistakes over and over. You'll also know how to handle all of your spelling difficulties. Your progress will become obvious to you. You will be confidently working towards achieving your target score. You will rapidly improve your vocabulary and writing accuracy in this process. And if you want to clarify a grammar, vocabulary, or structure point, you can ask your marker questions after your task is marked. So, why should you believe me? Well, this is not a computer-generated service or automated feedback. All our markers are real people and expert IELTS teachers giving you personalized, specific feedback on what you need to do to improve. Speaking for myself, I am a qualified English language teacher with both the certificate and diploma in English language teaching for adults. I also hold a Master of Arts in Applied Linguistics with First Class Honours from the University of Auckland, New Zealand. I've been teaching IELTS for over 16 years, helping hundreds of students to achieve their goals for both the general and academic modules. And that's why I know that I can help you to achieve IELTS writing success too. Now, thanks to the internet, I can give you all of the personalized writing feedback you need to hit your target band score. So you might be asking, how does this work and how can I start? Well, normally these writing packages are $56 for 8 tasks, $40 for 5 tasks, and $20 for 2 tasks. But because you have come on this webinar today, you've shown me that you are a person who is willing to take action to achieve your goals. And I want to reward you for your time and dedication to your future by doubling the number of tasks you can submit for today only. That means that now you can submit 16 tasks, $56, 10 tasks for $40, and 4 tasks for $20. That's a massive 50% discount. You can upload your writing 24/7 anytime you're ready, and your access to your packages will never expire. So let's take a look at the kind of feedback you receive when you buy our writing feedback packages. So here we have a question. A study shows that a lot of children from the age of 7 to 11 spend too much time watching TV or playing video games. How do you think this problem influences children, their families and society? What measures should be taken? Okay, so we have here a 4-paragraph essay, and you can see that on the side here are all of the comments about grammar and vocabulary. Let's take a look at a couple of them. So, the first sentence, in today's society, television and video games. Now, the writer actually wrote has, but you can see here games and television that it's plural, so the verb has to be have. So let's take a look at the comment over here. So the comment tells us subject-verb agreement. So in today's society, television and video games have become an essential entertainment for many children. Now, if we look at comment 2, it says use the article to indicate it is one of many entertainments, because the writer missed that article out. And the comments go through and they address issues such as these. If we come down into the second paragraph and read this sentence, this might cause an increasing number of diseases among young children, such as decreased vision, obesity, limbs. The writer wrote limbs, but actually what would have been better is to write twitching limbs. So if we come to comment 8, it's a collocation issue, so this is vocabulary. Now, after we've addressed all of the vocabulary and grammatical mistakes, then we come down and we give you some overall comments. Now, this writer needed 6.5, and what we do is we go through all of the 4 criteria that your IELTS writing is judged on. So that's task response, cohesion and coherence, lexical resource, and grammatical range and accuracy. And we make a comment about how you're doing, and then indicate whether you are below the band score you want. In this case, she wanted 6.5, or above the band score that you want, or actually on target. And the comments tell you the problem that you're having. So, for example, in task response, she's only addressing the task partially, and therefore she's below the target. In fact, that means that she's band score 5 for task response. Now, we can't give you a specific score because this is not an IELTS test. We are giving IELTS feedback, and we don't know whether you did this task within the time, whether you used a dictionary. So we are only marking what we see, and therefore we're only prepared to say below, above, or on target. Now, the overall score is below target, and that is because of this task response up here being below target. Finally, we give some summary comments, specific things that you can do to improve. So in task response, you need to address all parts of the task, and this means mentioning the 3 perspectives of children, family, and society. If we go back up to the question, we can see children, family, and society in the question, but this writer didn't address all of those aspects. If we come back to the overall comments, in the lexical resource, she needs to learn collocations to develop more appropriate word choices and pay more attention to using the correct word forms. That means perhaps she used a verb where she should have used a noun, or an adjective when she should have used a noun. And then finally, grammatical range and accuracy. Make time to check your work so that more sentences are error-free. This descriptor here, are error-free, relates to band score 7, 8 and 9. That's the way to go from band score 6 to band score 7. So you can see that in one task, if you were to pay really good attention to all of these corrections of your grammar and vocabulary, and then read the overall comments and the ways to improve, you've got a clear path for improvement. All you have to do is put these things into practice in your next task writing. Taking an IELTS test is expensive, so why waste your money and time and energy on taking the test when you may not be ready? So choose the package you want, click on the Buy Now button, and unlock the door to your future by achieving the IELTS writing score you need. Just imagine the next time you open your IELTS results and see the writing band score you were aiming for, knowing that all your plans can now be achieved. How would that feel? Remember, this offer is only available today, right now. You've shown me you are committed to your success. So why not speed up the process and take all of the guesswork out of your writing improvement? Your time is precious, so don't waste it searching all over the internet for free materials when everything you need to know to improve will be given to you in your personalized writing feedback. Don't miss out. Click on the Buy Now button to turbo boost your writing improvement. And if you decide not to click, I invite you to ask yourself, what is your future worth? Today, I'm offering you double the amount of tasks. That means if you buy the 16 task package, you're getting detailed feedback for $3.50 per task. Taking an IELTS test is expensive, so why waste your time and money and energy on taking the test when you may not be ready? Are your future study, immigration or job prospects worth $3.50 to get the confidence of knowing how to achieve the score you need? So, click the Buy Now button.
Thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate your commitment to your success. You've shown that by turning up and staying the course. And whether you take us up on our feedback packages or not, I hope that you have received value from this webinar, and I really look forward to hearing about your successes in the future. Take care. Goodbye.